2,000 years ago, the Colosseum was the beating heart of Rome. A stone giant rising out of the city like a mountain carved by human hands, holding in its hollow belly the noise of 50,000 souls. They gathered there not for plays, not for speeches, not for music. They came to watch men fight, and often die. The sand of the arena drank more blood than the battlefields of entire provinces. Yet what we forget, and what the history books rarely ask, is something far more subtle. Did the Romans actually love what they saw? Or did they sit on those stone benches wrestling with the same unease that stirs in us when we look back at it now? Because here's the paradox. Gladiators were adored like celebrities, painted on walls, carved into lamps, scratched into tavern graffiti by admirers who left their names next to theirs. And at the same time, they were despised. Slaves, criminals, outsiders, the lowest of the low. They were men condemned to live and die for entertainment, and yet some Romans swooned at the mere sight of them, just as we might when a famous actor steps out of a car surrounded by flashes of light. So what did Romans really think? Was it pride? Was it shame? Or something in between? A fascination that never dared speak its full truth. Imagine yourself there for a moment. The morning sun climbing over the arches, the crowd still trickling in. You sit on cold stone worn smooth by generations before you. Below, the sand is pale, raked carefully, a blank page waiting for the story to begin. Around you, men in togas murmur about politics, children fidget with impatience, women shield their eyes with veils against the glare. And then a horn sounds, low and heavy, and the entire place seems to shudder. That's when you feel it. The pulse of anticipation. A hunger not for food, but for spectacle. You don't know what you'll see, but you know it will be violent. And still, you lean forward. This is History Radio. And today, we're not simply recounting the blood and the battles. We're asking what those 50,000 spectators really thought as they sat shoulder to shoulder, watching men fight for their lives in the world's greatest theater. If you're new here, welcome. Think of this as a place to linger, to listen, to let the past breathe again. If you enjoy it, you might leave a comment or subscribe. It is the digital equivalent of tossing your coin into the arena, helping the show go on. No banners, no flashing signs, just a quiet invitation. So, let's walk through those ancient arches together, where the stone still echoes with cheers and cries. Let's enter the Colosseum not as tourists with cameras, but as Romans, eyes wide, hearts uncertain, wondering what it all meant. Because only then can we begin to understand what they truly thought of the gladiators who lived and died beneath that Roman sun. The Romans like to claim that everything they did had roots in ancient tradition. The gladiatorial games were no different. They told themselves that this thirst for blood began not as entertainment, but as duty, as ritual, as something almost sacred. When a great man died, his family would stage combats beside his funeral pyre. Not plays, not songs, but men fighting to the death, their blood an offering to the restless shade of the deceased. It sounds strange, doesn't it? Death offered to honor death. But in the Roman mind, blood was a gift of life, a way of binding the living and the dead. And in those early days, the contests were small. A handful of pairs, watched by family, clients, a circle of onlookers. Yet over time, like everything in Rome, it grew. What began as private ritual became public spectacle. Senators saw the value. Candidates for office saw the votes it could bring. And emperors saw the power of tens of thousands watching at once, unified by a single heartbeat of anticipation. By the late Republic, the games were no longer confined to funerals. They became political tools. A man seeking election might promise days of spectacles, hiring fighters, importing exotic beasts, parading wealth and cruelty in equal measure. The people cheered, and the ballot box swayed. Gladiators became propaganda in flesh, their bodies telling voters who was generous, who was powerful, who was worth following. And the Colosseum itself, Rome's most enduring theater of death, was the grand culmination. Built under the Flavians, it was a monument to stability after civil war, a stone promise that Rome was eternal. Bread for the stomach, blood for the eyes, and the illusion of unity for a restless city. But here lies the irony. As the games grew larger, so did the unease. Philosophers squirmed. Senators whispered. Even ordinary Romans wrote graffiti that sounded half in jest, half in shame. Because while the games claimed to be ancient tradition, at heart they were something far simpler. They were entertainment. Entertainment so extreme, so visceral, that it needed constant justification. Still, the origins mattered. They gave the Romans a story to tell themselves, a story that made the violence feel noble, necessary, rooted in the soil of their ancestors. And stories, as we know, are powerful. They let you believe that blood spilled on sand is not waste, but meaning. That men dying in chains are somehow preserving the dignity of Rome. So the next time you picture that arena, remember this. Every cheer, every gasp, every thumb pressed flat or turned down carried the weight of that origin myth. Without it, the games were just slaughter. With it, they were history, tradition, destiny. At least that's what the Romans told themselves. Step into the Colosseum, and you are stepping into a machine. A machine of stone, wood, rope, and iron, designed not simply to hold a crowd, but to orchestrate their emotions. 80 entrances channeled 50,000 people into their places with astonishing speed. Senators down low, close enough to smell the sweat and hear the grunts. Ordinary citizens higher up, their view a little distant, their voices still merging into the same great roar. Women and the poor at the very top, beneath the sun and the wind, their eyes squinting at the stage below. And at the center, the arena itself. To us, it looks like a simple oval of sand. To them, it was a stage of infinite possibility. Beneath that sand lay a labyrinth of corridors, cages, and pulleys. Animals from Africa, Asia, and beyond were hoisted up through hidden trapdoors, bursting onto the surface as if conjured by magic. Fighters emerged from darkness into blinding light, the crowd's roar crashing down on them before their eyes had even adjusted. One moment, a bare stage. The next, a forest, a lake, or a miniature naval battle, all conjured by engineers who turned violence into spectacle with the flick of a lever. It was a machine that fed on human life. The scale of it is almost incomprehensible. Tens of thousands of gladiators over the centuries. Beasts by the hundreds of thousands, lions, leopards, elephants, bears, all dying on that sand so that Romans could marvel at the reach of their empire. Every roar of a lion was also Rome roaring back at itself. Look how far we have conquered. Look at the wonders we can summon for you. The Colosseum was not just architecture. It was ideology cast in stone. Its arches, tier upon tier, seemed to whisper of order, of hierarchy, of Rome's ability to arrange even chaos into spectacle. The people could look up at the emperor, seated like a god, and see their own place in the cosmic order reflected back at them. Bread for the body, blood for the eyes, and reassurance for the soul. Rome was unshakable. Rome was eternal. And yet in that very order there was also unease. Because to sit in the Colosseum was to be reminded that Rome's greatness depended on death. Every convenience, every marvel, every spectacle required someone else's suffering. The Colosseum made that fact impossible to ignore. You could cheer, you could look away, but you could not pretend it wasn't happening. Think of it as a clock. The crowd was the pendulum, swaying between pity and excitement. The gladiators were the gears, grinding away in blood and sand. And the emperor, he was the hand that wound it all, making sure the machine never stopped. It was efficient, it was brutal, and it was dazzling. A reminder that Rome itself was a machine. Vast, orderly, and utterly indifferent to the lives it consumed. The Colosseum was built for noise. The roar of 50,000 voices was part of the spectacle itself, a wave of sound that surged and broke with every clash of blades. In public, Romans shouted, gestured, demanded blood with the same abandon we might show at a football match. But behind that noise, there was something quieter, more complicated. What they whispered, what they scrawled in taverns, what they admitted only in private. Gladiators were adored. They were the rock stars of the Roman world. In Pompeii, graffiti still survives, scratched into plaster by an eager hand. Crescens, the net fighter, the delight of the girls. Another proclaims, Celadus, the Thracian, is the heartthrob of the maidens. These were not the words of disdain. They were love notes, confessions, the same kind of messy fandom we see plastered across posters and social media today. A man condemned to fight could become an object of longing, his scars recast as proof of courage, his danger as proof of desirability. And yet, in the same breath, gladiators were despised. They were slaves, criminals, outsiders. No respectable Roman would want his daughter marrying one. No senator would toast one as an equal. To be a gladiator was to live in a paradox, adored on the walls of Pompeii, shunned in the halls of power, admired for strength, mocked for status, a hero and a disgrace all in one. Crowds loved the thrill, but some also felt the shame. Seneca, the philosopher, described the midday executions, where criminals were killed for sport, as pure butchery. He wrote with a tone of disgust, yet admitted how easy it was to be swept up by the crowd. Cicero, the orator, once praised the courage of gladiators, holding them up as examples of Roman virtue. Yet in the same speech, he reminded his audience that their profession was shameful. Even ordinary people seemed to wrestle with this contradiction. The graffiti of Pompeii was not just love notes, but also satire, mockery, crude jokes about fighters dying badly. It was the Roman way of processing the unease, by laughing, by ridiculing, by pretending that the spectacle was all just a game. It's easy for us to imagine the Romans as unfeeling, as if they delighted in cruelty without hesitation. But the evidence tells a more human story. They were fascinated, they were ashamed, and they were caught in between. Just as we might today watch a violent film, knowing it is wrong and yet unable to look away, so too did the Romans watch the arena. Public thrill, private shame, a guilty pleasure shared by a city of 1,000,000 souls. Not everyone in Rome was swept away by the roar of the arena. Some looked at the games and saw not courage or spectacle, but rot. They wrote about it, spoke about it, and sometimes even risked ridicule for questioning what others called tradition. Their words survive, and through them we hear a different Rome, one less enthralled, more uneasy, sometimes even disgusted. Take Seneca, the Stoic philosopher. He described an afternoon at the games where executions were staged between the grander combats. No artistry, no training, just men being killed for the amusement of the crowd. He called it butchery, nothing more. He said the spectacle coarsened the soul, made cruelty a habit. And yet, he admitted how contagious the excitement was. Even a man of philosophy could feel the tug of the crowd, the strange pull to shout when others shouted. It was precisely that danger, the erosion of self, the surrender to the mob, that he feared most. Cicero, earlier still, offered his own contradictions. He praised gladiators for facing death with bravery, for teaching Romans how to endure suffering with dignity. Yet he also reminded his audience that their profession was shameful, their lives degraded. It was as if he wanted to steal the lesson while distancing himself from the source. Use the gladiator's courage, he seemed to say, but don't ever be caught admiring the gladiator himself. Later, as Christianity began to seep into the Roman world, the criticism sharpened. Tertullian, a fiery North African writer, condemned the arena outright. He saw it as a school of sin, a place where men and women learned not virtue, but lust, rage, and cruelty. To him, the Colosseum was not the pride of Rome, but its damnation. Christians were urged to avoid the games, not just to spare themselves the sight of blood, but to resist the temptation of the crowd's frenzy. Even pagan writers could be uneasy. Pliny the Younger once praised a governor for banning spectacles in his province, suggesting that such entertainments distracted citizens from more useful pursuits. It was a quiet dig, but a telling one. Not everyone believed the empire needed the arena. Some believed it weakened rather than strengthened the moral fiber of Rome. And so the Colosseum, even in its glory, was shadowed by doubt. The cheers of 50,000 drowned out the words of philosophers, but the words survived longer. They remind us that Rome was not unanimous, that even as the games reached their height, voices within the empire questioned whether they should exist at all. Philosophers and critics could not stop the machine, but they left us the memory of resistance. A reminder that even in the most bloodthirsty of ages, there were those who stood apart, who asked the dangerous question, is this truly who we are? The Colosseum was never just about sport. It was politics written in sand and blood. Every game was a performance, not only for the crowd, but for the emperor himself, seated at the heart of it all. He did not just watch, he presided, like Jupiter on high, granting life or death with the tilt of his hand. And in that gesture lay the deepest truth. The games were about power. For emperors, the arena was a tool. It showed the people who held the keys to their pleasures, who could summon beasts from Africa, who could provide bread one day and slaughter the next. Panem et circenses, bread and circuses. That was the formula. Feed the stomach, dazzle the eyes, and you dull the mind. Keep the city entertained, and it will not ask too many questions about taxes, corruption, or distant wars. The scale of the investment was staggering. Entire fleets shipped exotic animals across the Mediterranean. Trainers, builders, stagehands, guards, all paid to keep the machine running. When Titus inaugurated the Colosseum in 80 CE, the games lasted 100 days. Thousands of gladiators fought. Thousands of animals died. The cost was immense, but the message was priceless. Rome was rich, Rome was eternal, and the emperor was the provider of it all. Yet propaganda works only if the people believe it. And they did, at least enough. The crowd cheered Titus, Domitian, Trajan, and the rest. They marveled at the extravagance. They praised emperors who gave them bread and blood and mocked those who denied it. A stingy emperor risked scorn. A generous one could buy devotion. The games were a barometer of legitimacy, and emperors knew it. But propaganda cuts both ways. To grant the people the spectacle was also to remind them of their own place. The gladiator was both hero and slave, and his fate in the arena was a living metaphor. The emperor gave freedom or death. The emperor controlled who rose, who fell, who was remembered. The Colosseum was not simply about death, it was about hierarchy. And every Roman sitting on those stone benches was reminded where they stood in it. Sometimes, emperors even entered the arena themselves. Commodus, infamous for his vanity, fought as a gladiator, slaying animals with a spear, posing as Hercules reborn. To some it was thrilling, the emperor himself in the sand, sweating like a common fighter. To others it was disgraceful, a lowering of imperial dignity. But either way, it was propaganda, the emperor showing that he too could master the spectacle, that he was more than a ruler, he was Rome embodied. So the Colosseum was more than stone. It was a message carved into the city itself. Come here, sit, watch, cheer. Remember who feeds you. Remember who rules you. And do not forget, the sand runs red because the emperor wills it. Every machine runs until it breaks. The Colosseum was no different. For centuries it thundered with cheers, groans, and the clash of steel. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the noise faded. The reasons were many. The empire itself began to strain. Money grew tight, frontiers cracked, and emperors had other crises to manage. Exotic animals became harder to capture and transport. Gladiators cost more to train and house. The extravagance that once seemed like proof of Rome's greatness became, over time, a burden it could not afford. And then came the shift in conscience. Christianity, once a whispered faith in hidden rooms, became a force that could no longer be ignored. The message was uncompromising. Human life was sacred. To watch it thrown away for sport was not entertainment, but sin. Fathers and mothers began to question whether they should bring their children to the games. Bishops thundered against the arena. Slowly, the moral tide turned. By the 5th century, the spectacles had withered, reduced to shadows of their former grandeur. The Colosseum remained, but the sand no longer ran red. What lingered was memory. For some, nostalgia for a Rome that had seemed invincible. For others, shame at the cruelty once celebrated. The Colosseum became less a theater of blood and more a ruin, a relic of an age when power was measured in bodies and cheers. Medieval pilgrims walked through its arches and shuddered. Poets and painters later romanticized it, imagining ghosts still circling the arena at night. Today it stands as both marvel and warning, proof of Rome's genius for building and of its appetite for destruction. And what of the gladiators themselves? In their own time, they were trapped in paradox, despised and adored, condemned and admired. Some rose to fame, their names carved into walls and remembered in whispers. Most vanished into the sand, their deaths unrecorded, their faces forgotten. Yet together they shaped the Roman imagination. They embodied courage, brutality, desire, and shame all at once. They were mirrors in which Romans saw both their pride and their guilt. We too cannot look away. We film violence, we dramatize it, we sell it as entertainment. We shake our heads at the Colosseum and yet tune into spectacles of our own. Maybe that is why the ruin speaks to us still. Because it is not only Roman, it is human. The need to watch, the unease of watching, the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of it. So the next time you picture the Colosseum, don't just imagine the gladiators or the emperor's hand. Imagine the crowd. 50,000 souls caught between thrill and shame, cheering and doubting, loving and despising the very men they came to see. That, perhaps, is the most Roman thing of all. And as you leave today, perhaps think of this. The stones still stand, but the voices are gone. Only questions remain. What did they truly feel, those Romans on the benches? Pride, fear, guilt, fascination, or perhaps like us, a little of everything?